Good morning, dear friends. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today on our alternate link. It is Thursday, January 13th, the 11th of Shvat. We're gathered here to study the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Presently, we are studying Masechet Shabbat, chapter 11. We are on 97b. Yesterday, we closed out a unit that was a little bit confusing. It was a little bit of a roller coaster, wherein we started off by exploring a brisa that talks about throwing an item from public domain to another public domain via passing through a private domain. After qualifying that private domain needed to have a roof on, we added that when one rabbi says you are chayiv and the other says pater, Rav Chanan quoted from Shmuel that it actually doesn't mean chayiv and pater, it means doubly chayiv or only one time chayiv. So we did a deep dive to understand what the two chiyuvim, the two problems would be, which were hachnasa and haitzah, throwing inwards and outwards, because again, you get something into the private domain and out of the private domain. In a sense, you have two malachis, and the chachamim would say you're only chayiv once. The Gemara says that is a challenge because Rebbe says that you're only going to be liable once when doing a av and a tola, a primary and secondary. The Gemara, therefore, or at this point, introduces another brisa that perhaps the teaching about the two liabilities versus one may apply, and it was a case where he was throwing from the private domain into the public domain, and it traveled for 4 amas. And so we did a little bit of investigation. Why should you be chayiv twice? Well, because you did two activities. You did haitzah, you brought it from one domain to another. You also caused it to travel 4 amas in the public domain. That's the reason why you should be chayiv twice. Alternatively, and that made sense, except does Rabbi Yehuda actually believe you could be chayiv twice for two related malachas? And ultimately, the Gemara explained how it is plausible that there would be an opinion, and it seems to be the prevailing opinion, that one could be entirely off the hook for causing something to go from a private domain into a public domain and then overshoots its destination, because according to the Chachamim, it's plausible that they said it all has to do with what your intention, what your kavanah, what your machshava was. And if your machshava isn't carried out, then there is no liability, at least not biblically speaking. And so basically, it's a little more complicated than that. We wanted to see if Rabbi Yehuda would believe that you could do two malachas. Initially, we said yes, then we said no. But that's the gist of the item, the subjects that we discussed yesterday. And let's share the screen and let's take a dive into the rest of the Talmud. We ended off over here, but let's just read it again. Amar, and of course, before we jump in, we are dedicating and learning for the healing, well-being, and good circumstances for the dear members of our Chabura and their households. And we are thinking particularly of the names that we have on our chat, that they shall be graced with a complete and speedy recovery. I also want to mention today is the yahrzeit of Reuven ben Yaakov Zelig, I believe it is, Hakoyin. So we'll add his name as well. So there's a little bit of a hypothetical conversation here. It's hypothetical because we're trying to make sense of a already seemingly rejected snippet of the Gemara. And that's Amalei Ravina Ravashi. Ravina asked Ravashi, there was a point in time yesterday in the Talmud where we thought that it's possible that Rabbi Yehuda would say that if a person throws something from one domain to the other and it travels 4 amas, he should be chayiv twice for carrying from one domain to the other and then for causing it to travel 4 amas. So he said, I don't understand. If he wants it to land, let's read Rashi. Even if you might suppose that Rabbi Yehuda would say that you should have to bring 2 karbonis, even if it's a tolda and an av together. There are no 2 malachas. Why? If you wanted it to land after 4 amas, hold on. If he wanted it to be less than 4 amis, well, then he didn't want it to land in the public domain, so he only caused it to move from one domain to the other. Oh, I'm sorry, because we said that he imagines that when it's in the air, it lands on the ground. But if he wanted it to land far away, basically, if he overshoots his destination, how could he ever be chayiv? If he overshoots his destination, which is the scenario that we said the Chachamim would say you'd be entirely exempt. Well, if it doesn't land where you want, why would Rabbi Yehuda say you're chayiv? And the Gemara responded, you'd only be chayiv twice if you don't really care where it lands. Which again, most sports, you care where the ball lands. Most times you're throwing something, you probably want it to land somewhere specific. And so if it doesn't land where you want it to go, even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that you should not be chayiv for that that off target. Now, I actually have a good question for you. Anyways, that's what the Gemara answers. So the only time you'll be chayiv twice for getting it from one domain to the other and then overshooting your target is if you don't really care where it lands. Sometimes you want something to go to a specific destination. Sometimes your primary objective is to get it out of the house. Sometimes there's something in the house, you get it out of the house. I don't care where it goes. So you throw it. Then you don't really care where it lands. So wherever it lands, that's where you wanted it to land. But let me ask you another question. Say you're playing some kind of competitive sport. Let's say you're shooting hoops. If the okay, this is just for amusement purposes. So if this is confusing, forget it. Suppose you're shooting hoops and you absolutely missed the basket. Do we say this is that he did what he wanted to do, or he didn't do what he wanted to do? Because I'll tell you why. On one hand, of course, you really wish that your ball would land in the basket. But on the other hand, you've chosen to engage in a sport where part of the sport is proving if you could win or not. And so you're making your best effort, but part of the sport is the understanding that you may not reach your destination. And so I don't know if our professor, I'm sorry to subject you to more sports analogies, but so then I don't know. I actually don't know the answer. From the purpose of our Gemara that talks about it not going where you want to go, I don't know if you can make that case in a sports scenario, because again, the purpose of engaging in the sport is challenging your ability. And if you get it into the basket, then you did good. And if you didn't, well, then you have to up your game. But that's part of the process of engaging in the sport, is sometimes getting it in the basket. And if you're not really, really great, sometimes not getting in the basket. So that has nothing to do with the Gemara. That has nothing. This is not going to further clarify our Gemara, but it's a question that I had. And if anyone has any thoughts, I'd certainly welcome and be curious to hear.
Rabbi.
Yes, Rabero.
Isn't the purpose of getting your house enough to make you chayav? You accomplished what you wanted to do.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If you just want to get it out of your house, well, then you accomplished your objective, regardless of where it lands. That is certainly so. All right, let's do some new Gemara. And this is, now I don't remember, was it Dr. Stalmer's question or Beryl's question? I don't remember. Let's see. But the Gemara, when I told Dr. Hammer?
The analogy with basketball of kavana, okay?
Yes.
So you're making it an all or nothing. Either it goes in the basket or it doesn't go in the basket. But there's a big difference between hitting the rim, going around the rim, and an air ball, which misses everything completely, okay? And I think we give recognition in other issues of halacha and Yiddishkeit. If you think of batel b'shishim and all sorts of other quasi heterim in terms of kavana. So to say that it's either you're scoring points or not scoring points, it's like saying if you wanted to score a 3-pointer and your foot's on the line and you score a 2-pointer, that it's meaningless. And that's foolish. So it's the same, from my point of view, it's the same, quote, foolishness to say you miss, it's no good. You hit it, it's good. So anyway.
So Dr. Hammer, so you're saying, first of all, first for the purpose of stats, is there a special stat for an air ball versus if it hits the rim and bounces off?
No.
But for your own covet, if an air ball is total shame.
Right.
So the shaila is, so if you're aiming for the basket and what do you call when it goes in and pops out, it doesn't end up going in. So then was your das? Did you get what you wanted? Well, you wanted to get it there. You just wanted it to fall down, but ultimately it's in this. So, anyways, okay, maybe it's a foolish analogy. I should probably defer
But
to the sports.
if you stay with sports, you have a better example of a quarterback who throws away the ball not to get knocked down. Sorry, Professor.
I hear you. But then it's nismala. Then that's his kavana. His kavana is to get the ball out of his hands at all costs, and that would be actually the perfect. I guess that's what you're saying. That's the perfect analogy. I don't care where it lands. I need to get it out of my hands and away from the receiver, away from the opposing team's defense. The barrel. You've opened a can of worms. All right, let's see the new Gemara. This was someone's question yesterday, or related to someone's question yesterday. Pshita, it's utterly obvious. Niskavein lizroik shmoina. If you want to throw something 8 amas, vizorak arba, but instead it only traveled 4 amas. What's obvious that you should be chayiv? Why? Harikosav shame mishimon. It's like you did 50% of what you wanted to do. You wrote, let's say you want to write Shimon, right? That's a Jewish name, Shimon, Simon. The first 2 letters of Shimon are Shin and Mem. When you write Shin and Mem, you've done part of the way, there, and you've already done something, so you should be chayiv. In the case of writing shame, the individual performed the prohibited labor of writing a 2-letter word, even though he didn't complete the original word. So according to Rabbi Steinsaltz's analogy, you perhaps didn't do your intention, but you did something. So just like shame, by the way, you're probably wondering how this jives with what we said previously. And the Gemara is going to ask that too. But at this point, the Gemara says, if you throw something and you fall short, it's like you did half a malacha, but you did a full standing malacha. You did 4 amas. Why? Because 4 amas also is called havara. 4 amas is also called causing something to move 4 amas. However, niskaven, the Gemara says, now we have a question. Niskaven lizrak arba. What if you only intended to throw 4 amas? Vizorak shmoina, and you threw 8 amas. Mahu, then you overshot your destination. Is that considered a malacha or not? And again, not to torment the dear professor, but it's very nageya. If you overthrow a football and you're past the end zone, it's not a completion. Or if you're too short, you don't have the first down. It's nageya. Sometimes the halachas of sports mandate that it needs to land in a specific place. And if it lands, if it falls short, it's not halfway, it's 0. I think that was the flip side of the doctor's previous analogy. And so the Gemara is saying, if a person intends to throw short and he throws long, what's the halacha?
Well,
So the Gemara says,
isn't it like if he was intending to throw it less than 4 amas, which would have been mutter, but he ended up throwing it over the 4, then he was in chayiv.
yeah, no. The point is he would have been chayiv if his intention was to do something that is not that is a melacha on Shabbos, 4 amas in the public domain. So he intended to do a melacha. The problem is he didn't do a good job executing what he wanted to do. And by the way, on one hand, sports is a fantastic analogy because it's the greatest instance in our world where people desire to cause something to travel a certain distance or whatever. But it also may be a bad analogy because sports is not most of human living. Most of human living, you're not getting points. You're like living a life. You need, for purposes of function, convenience, or whatever, you want to move things around. So admittedly, sports is an enjoyable analogy, but it does have its shortcomings too. But suffice it to say here, the item falls short. So here's the Gemara is explaining the question. Excuse me. Do we say, ha afikle, his intention was for the item to go out, to travel a distance. And ultimately, it traveled the distance you desired, and then some. So your kavanah was to travel 4 amas. It traveled 4 amas. Problem is, it didn't stop where you wanted it to stop, but it traveled 4 amas. So in that sense, you did your kavanah. There was a bonus, there was extra. And again, admittedly, the sports analogy makes it clear that when it doesn't go where you wanted it to go, it doesn't work. But in life, your intention was X, but you got a chumrah, you got a bonus. Alternatively, we say, he had somewhere that he wanted it to land, and it did not land there. So Gemara says, is this not synonymous with yesterday's statement? Does this not confirm or conform with what we said in the beginning of the lesson, that you should only be chayiv if you don't care where it lands, but if you do care where it lands, then you should be pater? Isn't that same statement, right? I'm sorry, period. So first of all, he says, one second. You think this is such a new question? We already have an instance in the previous Gemara where a person overthrew their destination, and we said that was considered a failure. That was considered that you're off the hook. So we already have the precedent, and the answer is pater. That's what the Gemara seems to be asking. Rashi, we said that you're only chayiv if it lands where you intended. Basically, he's saying, hold on. You said pshita that if you fell short, you're chayiv. If you overthrew, you had a question. Well, actually, in both scenarios, if it didn't happen the way you wanted it, if it didn't happen, I shouldn't say the way you wanted, what he intended, his kavana, his machshava, when he threw the item, he said, I'm throwing it here. He didn't have what he wanted. He should be pater. Doctor?
Where is the general concept of kavana kamasa applicable? When is it and when is it not applicable?
So you're saying, Doctor, like this. We know over here in Shabbos, we're saying if his kavana didn't happen, it's like it didn't happen. But we know elsewhere in Jewish thought, we say, machshava, the person, machshava tova kadosh baruch hu mitzaref l'maisa. The person has a good intention, Hashem considers it. So here's what I would say. In the court of mankind, among humans, we follow the cold hard facts. Where did it fall? In the court of heavenly opinion, by Hashem, so Hashem can consider, for the purposes of Hashem's cheshbon that He has with us, He understands our intention and our goodness, and so Hashem allows a good intention or a good desire to be considered mistarf l'maisa. When it comes halacha l'maisa, a person has a shaila, and he goes to the rabbi and he says, "Listen, this is what I wanted to do. This is what happened." Over there, what matters are the facts of the matter. It's similar, and this is a painful thing. We know that today there is no capital punishment. A person, God forbid, does a sin that in temple times would warrant a capital punishment. What do? You do teshuvah and you're absolved. Because Hashem is capable of forgiving us even for the most quote-unquote unforgivable sins. Let's see if we can go into a time machine and travel back to the time that the Sanhedrin convened and a person did a devastating crime that warrants the death penalty. And all the conditions met. And the guy says, listen, rabbis, I know I did that sin, but that person is not me. I did teshuvah. I'm utterly regretful. Does the court listen to that? And the tragic answer is no. Because teshuvah is something that's mostly between man and God. And so that helps us in the big picture. But it doesn't necessarily, it's the high court, they're not mind, I don't mean the high court. Humans are not mind readers. We're not charged with reading people's minds. We're only tasked with the facts that come before us. So I don't know if that really answers the question, but I guess that's the answer. Whenever it says machshava mitzaref l'maisa, it's like kadosh baruch hu mitzaref l'maisa. It is Hashem who, and ultimately the buck stops with Hashem. In the biggest picture, when all is said and done in neshama after 120, all that really matters is Hashem's opinion and impression. But in this world, judges can only a judge can only defer to what he sees. Yes.
We have it clear, very clearly.
Exactly. At the end of the day, the only one we need to be accountable for, and the one that we will be accountable to, is Hashem. And so it's a
But
lot of comfort.
We can't use that as an excuse. Lamata.
It's not going to work in, like, first of all, interpersonal, you rear end your friend's car. I mean, he could forgive you, but you're going to have to also make things right, because he said, listen, I never intended to rear end your car, so it didn't happen. No, the car's still smashed up. And so we have to make things right. But Hashem, in the biggest picture, gives us the power to repair everything. And anyways, so that I hope that's somewhat of a perspective on that. But the Gemara basically ends. Bottom line, we already have a precedent. Ravina and Rav Ashi have established, unless a person says, I don't care where it lands, well then, if it didn't land where they wanted it, whether they overshot, they underthrew, like the question here started off by saying only if you overshot, but that's identical with this previous teaching. But there's another question the Gemara is going to ask. Who says that if you intend to throw something 8 amas and it only goes 4, who says that's 50%? It might be an all or nothing situation, like the doctor shared. It might be an all or nothing situation. Either it went in the basket or it didn't. If it didn't go in the basket, you have no points. So there's no such thing as, it's not cumulative. I think there are other sports that things are cumulative. So let's say darts, not cumulative, but let's say darts, well, maybe you intended to get the bullseye, but you can still get points if you're, or I don't know, is it horseshoes?
Right.
Does it work?
In English, the expression is the closest only counts in horseshoe throws.
Right. So in horseshoes and darts, even if you missed, but otherwise it's an all or nothing proposition. Folks, I have to remind you of another unfortunate fact. It looks like in 10 minutes or so, remember last time we had the alternate account, they knocked us off. So it looks like it's going to happen again. So I just wanted to give you a heads up. If it does conk out, know that I'm not trying to get rid of everyone or get out of here early. But unlike last time, we tried to restart and it didn't really work. When the lady sings and the and the thing drops, that'll be the close of our discussion for today. And thank you for your. All right.
Problem with calling. No.
Listen, I was very sensitive. I didn't say the fat lady. I think that today we have to be more
politically correct.
We have to be more sensitive. We do. Vidika Amris, and then the Gemara says, "Let me attack you further." Hare kasav shemishimain mi dummy. Is it a good analogy? Is writing part of a word that is also a word a good analogy for throwing, underthrowing, or overthrowing, or getting halfway to your destination? Hasam kama deleichsiv shame loy miskaven leishimoin. Hold on, I want to see how Rabbi Steinsaltz explains. Hasam kama deleichsiv shame loy miskaven leishimoin. And it's coming to the Zarek Dal Pshita, the Pshita lay the Chiyuva, Kamaisiv mi dami, Hasam kol kama the Likas of shame, Loy Michtav Shimon, Hilchak Hikas of okay. Hasam kama the Likas of shame, Loy Michtav Le Shimon. Shame is, right? Shin Mem is the first 2 letters of Shimon. It is a necessary part of the journey of Shimon. So you actually do have the cumulative or the initial deposit in the writing of the name. But when you throw something 4, I'm actually having some trouble here. When you write shame, you have a part of the process. But when you throw 4, that's not 8. It's not 8. You don't have anything. You don't have anything of your intention. It's not like you're halfway there. Rashi and Kol Kama Delay Zarek Dalid. Shetunuach L'Seif Dal Loim is Darek Leitami. When it lands at 4, it's not at 8. Hilkach Kinach L'Seif Dalid Leiniskam Machshafte. When it lands at 4, you're not there. Whereas by shame, you already have you're halfway. You actually have part of the finished product. And so therefore the Gemara leaves us with a little bit of a question. We don't, at least that's what Rabbi Steinsaltz learned here. The question remains unresolved about what happens if you overthrow. Now, what happens if the question remains, at least according to this, unresolved? So let's look at the Rambam. A person is intending to throw something 8 amos, and it lands within 4 amos, or I'm sorry, it lands 4 amos in. Chayiv shaharei nasa kishir hamalacha v'nasas machshavte. Ultimately, you caused an item to travel 4 amos in the public domain, and that is a malacha. And v'nasas machshavte. By the way, I think it's possible that the Rambam learned our Gemara differently, and it's possible that we could go back and read the Gemara the opposite of what I told you. I was relying on Rashi and Rabbi Steinsaltz, but I think we could explain the Gemara to say exactly the opposite, and that's why learning Gemara is a joy and a journey and a challenge. Everyone knows that there is no way on God's green earth that an item will reach 8 amos. It has to travel. It has to start the journey. And so the journey to 8 includes 4. It's never going to reach 8 until it passes 4. So maybe the fullness of your desire didn't happen. But when a person says, hey, I want to throw this 8 amos, you know what he's saying? I want to throw this 1 amma and 2 amos and 3 amos and 4 amos and 5 amos and 6 amos and 7 amos, and it's going to land at 8 amos. And so 4 is part of what he is envisioning. I think that's what the Rambam's saying.
Don't talk to strangers.
But if you overthrow, then he says pater. Because the person's machshava never envisioned the ball traveling past where it was supposed to land. The Rambam, again, I think the Rambam is saying differently than, it could be that I misread the Gemara. That happens sometimes. But I think the Rambam is learning our Gemara exactly the opposite of what I told you. But it's actually an intuitive way of reading, which is why maybe I wonder if that's not what the Gemara actually means according to everybody. Again, the Gemara says like this. Can you compare Shem and the fact that Shem and Shimon to throwing? Yeah, I think I told you this Gemara wrong. I think the intuitive way of reading the Gemara is the way the Rambam says. By Shem and Shimon. Shem is not Shimon, it's a different word. This is how I think the Rambam will learn the Gemara. However, when you throw something, to throw something 8, you necessarily need it to travel 4. And so certainly the Rambam will tell you the Gemara this way. I think it's possible that this is the simple way of reading the Gemara. And so basically, 4 is part of the journey to 8. However, 8 has no relationship to 4. Because again, I think what the Rambam is saying is when you throw something, you envision its entire journey. And so even if it's only a partial way, that was part of what your intention was. If you overshoot...
I didn't guess in this discussion whether it was important that shame is a word in itself. And if it wasn't a legitimate word, then things would be different.
Possibly. But generally what we say is that before this conversation, generally we say, listen, even if you didn't write Shimon, but shame is a word. So the discussion isn't, is this part of the word of Shimon, because you didn't write Shimon, but you wrote another word. I want to revise myself again. The way I explained the Gemara initially is what Rashi is saying. And what I explained to you now is what the Rambam is saying. And it seems like a big deal. It's very interesting how you have 2 opposite ways to understand the Gemara. Either it is more obvious that shame should be a problem than Shimon, because Rashi says, you intended to write Shin, Mem, Ayin, Vav, Nun. Guess what? Mazel Tov, Shin, Mem, which you intended to write, is a word. So you wrote a word. Maybe it's not the word you intended to write, but it's letters you intended to write. So Rashi explains, Shem is Shemain. You had a kavana to write Shem. Your kavana to write Shem was subsumed in a larger word. But throwing something, if it doesn't land if it doesn't land where you wanted it to, then it's nothing. When you write something, the act of writing is permanent. But when you throw something, you can't reactivate the throw. You can pick it up and throw it again, but that act ended. It terminated prematurely. So if it's not what you wanted, you're left with nothing. That's, I believe, how Rashi learns the Gemara. But again, the Rambam says it exactly the opposite. When it comes to Shem and Shemain, well, listen. Again, I may be misexplaining this, but anyways, he says every step of the journey is kind of in your intention. You didn't. Now, Dr. Hammer, every time a person, if you're a quarterback, it's not like every time you throw the football and you're trying to do a 30-yard throw. It's not like you think consciously, okay, yeah, I'm going to throw 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You don't have that active machshava, but you're imagining the journey of the ball. And so you're envisioning that the ball is going to be propelled through all of that way until it reaches where you want it to go. And so the Rambam and tells us, the Gemara says that in a sense, your kavana was fulfilled. Maybe not the full part of your kavana, but you had a kavana for this ball to travel 4 amas. It traveled 4 amas. Now, nebuch for you were hoping it was going to hit the receiver, but that's